So I think, you probably heard about the war for talent. It's probably the third most widely discussed war today after the war on drugs and the war on terror. I think it's equally successful, and it shares some other parallels. The more money is invested or devoted to fighting the war for talent, the worse organizations seem to fare at it. For those of you who don't know the history, it's about 20 years ago that McKinsey coined this term, and the basic idea seems very sensible today, quite commonsensical in fact, that people are one of the major assets of organizations, so organizations should invest more resources into identifying, managing, engaging, and retaining talent, and hopefully hire McKinsey to do that, or other consultants. And I think today, this is a widely accepted idea. Some of you might play a role in the war for talent. If you're working in HR, you do. If you're a leader in an organization, we do. When we try to describe what we do to people who are not in the field, we often use the war for talent as a metaphor. So they said, well, you have the war for talent. We're sort of like the arms manufacturers in the war for talent. So we create tools that are used in organizations to fight and win, the war for talent. CEOs or leaders of organizations are sort of the generals. HR directors or talent management VPs are the lieutenants. And then coaches, consultants are sort of like the mercenaries or the hitmen. Yeah? They take our tools and they go there and try to deploy them in some capacity. And ultimately, what do we mean by talent? Talent is the commodity being fought for. That's people, okay? And our tools, help organizations and these different individuals understand people. We are broadly in the business of understanding people, and we use psychology, more specifically personality, as the organizing framework for that. So 5 things. The first is to properly understand what we mean by talent. And although lots of people talk about talent, there's really only a minority of people who have a useful or robust definition of talent that aligns vaguely with what the science knows about talent or how it defines. So there's 4 key heuristics or shortcuts or very, very simple ways to understand talent. And you can sometimes rely on one or the other, and sometimes, in some cases, all of them apply. The first is the rule of the vital few, okay, which is based on Vilfredo Pareto's discovery more than 100 years ago, that in any system, in any group or collective, whether they're individuals, animals, plants, if you can measure output or productivity, you will find a distribution that reflects the fact that 20% of individuals or people or animals or plants, he actually discovered this with the plants in his garden and then applied it to wealth distribution in Italy, that 20% of the individuals account for 80% of productivity, and vice versa. 80% of the individuals account for 20% of the productivity. So whether you are a very successful and big organization like Google or a small organization, unknown, small, medium-sized business, you will find this distribution that there's a few vital few individuals who are accounting for most of the productivity, most of the output. And this also applies to negative or counterproductive work behaviors. It's usually 20% of the people who account for 80% of the problems in an organization, and 80% of the people who account for 20%. So who are the talented individuals? Well, from an econometrics perspective, is the vital few, the 20% of people who account for 80% of productivity or output. The second heuristic or law of talent is what psychologists refer to as the maximum performance principle, which is, well, what do we mean by talent? The best a person can do. If you can measure or quantify somebody's performance, if they're an athlete in athletics, if they're a manager as a manager, if they're an employee, a salesperson, that, you can see where they peak or what the best or the maximum that can do is, and you can assume that that is, it's not an estimate of their potential, but it's based on a very, very well-established principle, which is that past performance is a good indicator of future performance. So if you can see that somebody has done really well in the past and better than others, then you can assume that they have more talent than other people. The third one is the idea that talent has to do with really effortless performance, okay? And this is a very, very implicit heuristic, but we use it all the time. The idea is that if you compare the performance or output of two individuals, and one person has made less effort to achieve that, they must have more talent, okay? And in any field, again, whether it's athletics, education, management, business, the arts, music, here we have Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who at the age of 5, apparently was already composing symphonies, and he knew how to play the violin and the piano at the age of 3, without obviously having much training. What you can assume also is that if they try harder or they make more of an effort, they will perform even better or even higher. So the idea here is very simple, that performance is a function of ability and effort, okay, or talent and motivation. You need both, but talented individuals need less effort to achieve the same result, okay? So therefore, they're more trainable. You have to invest less time and money and resources to train them so they can achieve similar results. And the final heuristic is this, okay, is that talent really to some degree is personality in the right place, okay? If you read or review organizational psychological research over the past 4 or 5 decades, the question that we're asked all the time as personality psychologists is, well, is my profile good or bad? Well, it depends, okay? So the same profile will be good for something, but bad for other things. There is hope, even if you are someone like Kim Kardashian, who arguably doesn't have many assets, but found the right niche for her career strengths, yeah? In an age where being a good self-promoter and a kind of a narcissistic, trashy pop icon, cultural icon can get you far, she clearly has a talent for, being Kim Kardashian. Okay, for selling, including products or things that might not be regarded as very sophisticated or impressive, but that has always been the case. People talk the same way about jazz musicians 50, 60 years ago, or about Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley. There is an historical cultural deterioration of role models and icons, which also mean that, the successors of Kim Kardashian, if you forward in time 50 or 100 years, will make Kim Kardashian seem very intellectual, yeah? We will look back at her days and said, yeah, but no, Kim Kardashian, she really had almost this metaphysical intellect, okay? And which is also interesting that she was mentored and trained by Paris Hilton. She started her career as Paris Hilton's, which shows that Paris Hilton clearly has good leadership, or at least good mentorship skills. The disciple was bigger than the master. And sometimes these 4 heuristics come together. I had to show, as an Argentine soccer fan, I had to show Lionel Messi, and who really, really ticks the 4 boxes. Even though he's part of what is probably the best and most successful soccer team of all times, he accounts for more than 70 or 80% of goal, assists, and critical points. So he's surrounded by stars, yet he is the vital single individual in the team and part of the vital few. Secondly, his maximum performance, or the best he can do, is incredible. Most soccer players or players in any field have YouTube compilations that show the best 5 goals or the best. You have the best 50 goals of Messi, and even number 49 is incredible. Thirdly, there's an element of effortless performance that resembles, Roger Federer playing tennis. He can probably play for another 5 or 10 years, and while Nadal and Djokovic are breaking sweat and look a bit disheveled, Federer looks like a prince, and because it's effortless, okay? And finally, it is also personality in the right place. He cannot reproduce, well, not only couldn't he be like Kim Kardashian, or not only would you want him as CEO of Apple, he also can't reproduce his performance playing for Argentina. He has to be in Barcelona with that team and those teammates, okay? So it's a good example of all the pieces coming together. So what do we know about measuring talent, which is the next question? We can define it. We know how to, broadly identify who the talented individuals are. The next question is, what qualities do they have? Okay, and there are only 2 key questions that you ask in talent identification. The first one is, what should you assess? Okay, and I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that organizations, spend a lot of time developing extensive and comprehensive competency models. The joke we use in psychology is, and it's not very funny, but it's accurate, a camel is a horse designed by a committee. Okay, so it's how to reinvent the wheel and come up with labels that are groovy, and then the next HR fad emerges. Okay, it's very simple in our view. You have millions of jobs and millions of organizations, so to some degree the answer is going to be, well, it depends for what, but at the same time there are some general buckets of talent that apply to all jobs and individuals, okay? So there are 3 things that individual contributors or employees tend to display when they are talented, when they have been classified as talented. First, they're more rewarding to deal with, okay? So they're not a pain in the neck, but actually people enjoy having them around. And don't forget that in 80% of the cases, and I'm making this statistic up, it's not 80%, but as you know, 86.5 of the statistics are made up. Okay, so another academic joke, not very funny, although it takes a bit of time to process. So. In the vast majority of circumstances, people are promoted. Why? Because their supervisors like them. Okay, so it's no surprise that rewardingness, likability, being charming, charismatic, or at least not having adverse impact or effects, not being a pain to your supervisor or manager, will get you promoted. Secondly, of course, people need to be smart somehow, able. And thirdly, they need to be productive. Okay, so likable, able, and willing to work hard. And then you can break these different buckets of talent into different traits, like rewarding means warm, trustworthy, actually predictable. People, managers, and people in general hate others who are unpredictable. You want to be able to predict what people will do. And smart is a function of hard skills and soft skills, the stuff you put in your CV and other generic things such as intellectual ability, curiosity, and productivity is it's a function of being hardworking, ambitious, and so forth. And that if you're considering people for higher levels of the organizational hierarchy, you also want them to be leader-like and entrepreneurial. You want them to be able to manage others, and you want them to be able to create value, exploit opportunities, navigate the sea of bureaucracy and risk aversion that infests big organizations. And once you answer these questions, and by the way, you can fit in any competency model, any framework within these 5 categories, then you break it down into different scales or competencies. These are the ones we use. In yellow, you have what we call the bright side of people's personality, so your potential or what you show when you're at your best. In red, the dark side, or your derailers, your toxic assets, the things that might get you fired rather than promoted. And in blue, your values, your needs, the things that you are trying to fulfill. So that's the what question. The second question around talent identification is how. Okay, so we know the what. And of course, you can be more specific and say, well, in this job, I really need more of this, less of that, and then you do a proper analysis. But what about the how question? So there's a lot of methods for identifying talent or measuring these things, or the degree to which these things vary. You have old methods like interviews, biodata, supervisory ratings, some more modern, like situational judgment tests, of course, self-reports, resumes, references, and some new tools like digital interviews, big data, gamification, which are mostly technologically enhanced versions of old tools. In most cases, what is being assessed is what we call personality, okay? So it's typical differences between individuals. The whole science of personality is based on very simple premises. One, people are different. Two, people are consistent. And three, you can measure these consistent differences between people to predict behaviors, okay? And this starts 100 years ago or so. Some of you will be familiar with early personality tests. They used to be projective. So, the idea here is that by describing what you see in a set of ambiguous or ambivalent stimuli, you will project inner fantasies, repressed aspects of your personality that you try to hide otherwise, and that might take your psychoanalyst 10 years to discover. Okay, so this is a classic example of the Rorschach test, and you can think, you ask the person, so what do you see here? So if you see a ballerina or the silhouette of a woman or a butterfly, you're fine, okay? If you see a bat or a vampire or a killer vampire or two people fighting, you might be a bit psychopathic or paranoid. But it doesn't work, so it doesn't matter. If you see those things, it has no validity, very little validity. So tests that are less cryptic and actually more straightforward work much better. These are the tests that we create and we develop here in most instances. Right now, upstairs, there's an army of researchers thinking of questions and writing them down and testing them on people. But they should not be disturbed, and they haven't had human contact for about 15 years. So we don't allow them to come here. They're working hard. It really is about asking the right questions and finding the right scoring key to interpret the answers, okay? And one critical thing that people often misunderstand is that we really don't care about how much self-awareness or introspection you are capable of. We don't take your answers at face value. All we do is to compare your answers with other people's answers, and then we look at what's the correlation between choosing, yes or no in different questions and different behaviors at work. In other words, people who endorse certain items or certain questions tend to do these different things at work, or tend to be seen in such ways by others, or tend to perform in such ways at work. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. A well-known question evaluating or statement evaluating your degree of emotional stability, or how adjusted you are, or how neurotic you are, if you reverse score it. My parents never loved me. It doesn't really matter if your parents loved you or not, okay? But if you say yes, you're probably more unstable. Okay, you're probably more neurotic, your adjustment score goes down, okay? Because you think that it's all their fault and that they didn't love you, and that's the narrative you have in your head about yourself. Another example, I'm good at everything I do. This isn't a test, question, or an item evaluating your competence or even your confidence. It's evaluating how arrogant you are, okay? So people who say yes to this tend to be seen as others, by others as deluded, obnoxious, arrogant. And this, by the way, is a very old example, but it's very timely now. So what we're interested ultimately is not in your self-views, but in how other people perceive you. Okay, so the questions that you answer in our assessments have been answered by millions of people, and for most of these individuals, we also know how they're regarded by others in 360 surveys at work, or how they perform. So we can make a safe probabilistic inference that if you answer yes or no to all these questions, you're probably like this, you're probably like that, okay? But what we care mostly about is your reputation, which we define as the you as other people know. Okay? It's not to do with your self-views, but with how other people see you. So in some ways, our tests translate your self-views into other people's views on you. And when you get feedback, they help you understand how you might be seen by other people. Great quote I found the other day by David Bowie. I'm trying to stay current. And so although I like David Bowie before he died, here's a great quote. On reputation by him, he said, "I am only the person the greatest number of people believe I am. And we absolutely agree with this, because I mean, there's a history of 5 or 6 decades of social psychological research showing that most people's self-views are distorted, at the very least, and diluted in most cases. Yeah? You can read the biographies of the most brutal dictators in the world, and in their own eyes, they were very altruistic and great people trying to save or advance, good causes. But in other people's eyes, obviously that wasn't the case. So, and the advantage that this approach has, the science of personality is very robust. There is a 100-year history or tradition that explores individual differences in personality, bright and dark side characteristics, and that can document, catalog all these different correlates or consequences that personality has. So we know, not just through our own research and our own tools, but also through the independent research, what it implies, what implications does it have if you have this personality or this profile and so forth. Now, you don't need to spend 100 years or even 1 year or 10 years reviewing that evidence. You can just watch the documentary that our marketing team put together. It's called The Science of Personality. This was the cue to remember that I have to tell you about is the URL is thescienceofpersonality.com, and it's only 37 minutes. So if you have nothing else to do on a Saturday night or the weather forecast is not too positive, you can synthesize 100 years of research in 37 minutes. It's never been done before, except by the people who watched this before. Okay. What about the next step, which is engaging talent? How can you actually motivate your employees, make them happy, energize them, give them a sense of purpose, and so forth? And we have a very simple model to guide interventions to engage employees, and it's based on the very simple notion that ultimately, although again there's lots of different types of people and lots of different types of culture and people are very different, ultimately everybody wants just 3 things. There are 3 core or fundamental needs that drive human behavior, also at work, but not just in the workplace. So what do people want and what do people need? 3 things. First, we want to get ahead, so we want to compete with others and beat them, be better than them, and achieve certain things and acquire status in some form. We also want to get along, bond with others, and create or attain a sense of camaraderie, and that's our affiliation instinct. And by the way, those 2 instincts are in constant or ongoing tension. Okay? Freud made reference to this when he compared people to hedgehogs in the winter. He said hedgehogs in the winter, they get cold, so they need to get close to each other, but if they get too close, it becomes a bit prickly, and they sting each other with the spines, so they need to separate again. But then they become cold, so they need to get close again. But then it's a bit, and I'm not going to continue, but I think you understand that that's the tension, okay? Likewise, people need to balance this need to compete with each other, but also get along. And the most successful people and the most successful and effective leaders are able to get along in order to get ahead, okay? So they bring people in with them, and they get them on board, and they get buying, so that they emerge legitimately as leaders. And the third core meaning or fundamental universal need is what we call finding meaning, okay, which relates to learning, making sense of reality. It's because of our inherent need to find meaning that in any form of human society or civilization, you always have not one, but multiple systems of meaning competing. In the beginning, it was, mysticism and early manifestations of religion. Then it was organized religion. Then it was science. Now you have, Scientology. I mean, there's lots of different systems, okay? Philosophy as well, somewhere in between religion and science. That's the generic question, but if you want to engage and motivate people, you have to work at the individual level. And it's amazing that very, very few organizations have gotten this far. If they have a formal approach or system or strategy for engaging and motivating people, they assume it's just one. Okay, we're going to motivate people with money, or we're going to motivate people with titles. We're going to motivate people with interesting work. We're going to motivate people with a cool culture. People want different things. Each individual wants to achieve status, affiliation, and learning through different ways, okay? So some individuals are more motivated by recognition, which means that they will want praise and positive feedback. Some will want power, which means that they will want to manage an army of people. Some are driven by financial motives, so they're driven by commerce, and so forth. And it's only once you decode the individual values that people have that you can engage them, okay? We also know through our research and practice that leaders are a fundamental cause of engagement and disengagement. For those of you who are familiar with the UK version of The Office, which is the only version that should have been done, but I know that it's slightly controversial for me to say this here, and I am starting to like Stephen Carell, actually. Not because of that, but his other work. Ricky Gervais, David Brent, and his equivalent character in the American version is such a great and successful example of a manager because so many people can identify with him. And it also illustrates the effects that diluted, obnoxious managers have on team morale and on an organizational culture. So we estimate that around 25 to 30% of the variability in employee engagement levels is directly the product or dependent on the personality of the leader. Okay? How do we know this? Because we measure leaders' personalities in a big organization, then we compare how engaged their teams are, and you can correlate that, model that statistically. Contrary to popular belief, especially the romantic notion of leaders that governs the Western world, the best and most engaging leaders in the world are actually fairly boring. Okay? They are not charismatic, they are stable, they are well-adjusted, they're not flamboyant, they're predictable, they're calm. I mean, they're very boring. There's no other way to describe it. There will be no movies made about Angela Merkel. I can guarantee you this. And maybe a few movies made by Silvio Berlusconi, which is the one you want to watch. But if you have to work for one or the other, or have one of the two running your country, I can tell you who you should choose, okay? So what employees really want is not leaders who self-promote, who are narcissistic, who might appear charismatic in the short run, but people who actually are not self-centered, who are other-centered, who have good judgment, who are competent, and who can build teams. So what do we know about developing talent, which is the next stage? And I think there's a huge amount of money spent on training, learning, and development, and coaching, certainly a lot more than organizations spend on attracting, identifying, and selecting employees, even though it should be the other way around. I think our line is, when selection fails, there's always training and development, right? You have the wrong people on board, so then spend all this money trying to make them effective. There's a long literature and a big and extensive body of research on the degree to which people change. And this is one of the most widely asked questions in psychology. Can people change? The answer is yes, but mostly they don't. Okay? So if you leave people to their own devices, they change very little. When they change, they mostly change in a predictable direction. And they mostly become amplified or exaggerated versions of themselves. Okay, so it's very hard for somebody who is really uncreative to become very creative, which is what organizations would want, or somebody who's very dim to become very smart, somebody who's very lazy to become very hard. And the reverse is also hard, to turn somebody very hardworking into somebody lazy. Not as hard, but it is still hard. So left to their own devices, people don't change very much, mostly because they overestimate their ability to change. There's this wonderful scene at the end of The Godfather 1 when Michael Corleone promises to his wife that he is going to change. He's going to ditch all his mafioso activities and go into legitimate business, and just 2 more years, and I have things under control, and then I'll start really selling olive oil, or whatever he wants. And he really truly believes that he can do that, but of course he can't, okay? There's this inherent pressure, internal pressure, that drives our habits. Habits take a long time to form, even if you could change change them. It would require a time machine to go back to when you're 5 or 6 years old. As you know, 70 or 80% of the New Year's resolutions are broken even in January. Some of you may have had New Year's resolutions, already broke them. And so change requires unusual external pressure or artificial conditions, okay? Which is why you go to a professional, in the old years, and some coaching methodologies are still based on psychoanalysis, the idea that, you have to dig deep to identify your real problems and the real source of your behaviors and maybe come to terms with childhood experiences. And it's just very unpractical, doesn't change. And who has 10 years, to do this? So you need shorter, more effective techniques or methodologies. Our approach and the approach we prescribe is narrowly focused on the dark side of your personality, okay? So, and we are almost alone in this approach because the vast majority of coaching programs, interventions, certainly now and certainly in America, and it keeps growing and growing, focuses on people's strengths. It argues that everybody is special in their own way and that you should just ignore or completely neglect your faults. In fact, the word weaknesses, faults, or flaws has almost become taboo in the American HR, mainstream HR circles, where people are described as having strengths and opportunities, developmental opportunities. So what is this candidate like? Well, he has a lot of developmental opportunities. Have you got somebody with fewer developmental opportunities? Maybe with none? They all seem to have a lot of opportunities. Okay, we focus not on opportunities, but on faults, on weaknesses, on the toxic aspects of our personality, the traits, behaviors that are really undesirable in the long term and then threaten your ability to get along with others and build teams. So we're not afraid or embarrassed to talk about the dark side. I'll give you an example. I'll show you mine. Okay, so I'm opening up here to you. I will show you the dark side of my personality. For those of you who are trained in our assessments, you may be wondering now, how was this guy hired or even promoted to his current role? And the answer is because I go to great lengths to keep my dark side in check as often as I can. You can see here by my profile that I'm kind of cynical and volatile. So I have trained myself over the years to not reply to certain emails and to count to 10, 20, or 50, and to think that maybe reality is not as bleak as I see it. I'm also quite arrogant, and I have an eccentric and problematic imagination. I am a bit full of myself, so I react negatively to negative feedback. If you criticize me, I will be angry. And my instinctual reaction is to attack you and fight you and beat you. But I know that that's a problem. So, over the years I've been trying different things, Buddhism, meditation, and yoga, and it still is a problem. But you can work on it. And most importantly, certain low scores on derailers can be very problematic. So I have a single-digit scores on diligent and dutiful, which means I have zero attention to detail and I have problems with authority. If you tell me to do something, I won't do it. Okay. So our founder who developed these assessments, Robert Hogan, told me once he saw my profile, you have the profile of a delinquent or an entrepreneur. Why don't you come and work for us? And I said, okay, well, there's not many people who would offer me a job, so here we are. As said, the mainstream reality or outside of us, really, most people just focus on positive attributes. I think it's a bit unfortunate that the whole HR industry or management industry has really become a kind of organizational or management version of the self-help industry. Its goal is to make people feel good. Its goal is to ignore certain problems and ignore the main problems and just pretend that everything is wonderful. You might be familiar with the fact that many firms have decided to ditch negative feedback altogether. So they only have in their performance appraisal sessions, they only give positive feedback or no feedback at all. And this is only getting worse. Here we have Marcus Buckingham, the pioneer of the strength movement, who doesn't have a dark side. He only has strengths, as you can see in this picture here. Finally, what can we say about the future of talent? How is technology affecting the talent identification industry? What trends are we seeing? Is there a bright future ahead? Is this a brave new world? Is this just a world of new fads? So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about this. You know, the first thing or trend that we highlight is the fact that there are now lots of new tools to pick up novel talent signals, okay? So imagine that before you relied on, I don't know, questionnaire data or interview behavior or references, now we can rely on signals that didn't exist before, like, for example, your social media activity, for example, your facial movements or body language or the things you do during an interview, a video interview, or the things you say. You know, there's a lot of advancements and developments in voice recognition, voice profiling software that regardless of the content of what you're saying can provide an estimate of your potential or your personality. So there's lots of things happening in that area. The second trend and change or shift is towards a reality that will highlight or will be governed by talent on demand. You know, the fact that you can, much like you do with Uber or with eBay buyers or in mobile dating, quickly bridge the gap between supply and demand by finding a worker, an employee, maybe even a manager nearby, okay? If it all really depends on the accuracy and the trustworthiness of the reputation index. You might remember that in the early days, it was a little bit dodgy and not that safe to buy things on eBay because you think, well, it's not a shop, I don't know, etc. But as the reputation index, the score, became more reliable and trustworthy, people started buying computers, cars, expensive things. Okay, same in the realm of mobile dating. When you see that people, you have friends in common with them, or there are increasingly growing number of mobile dating sites that enable you to rate and profile past people that you go on a date. And if you can trust that, people make inferences based on that reputation. Same with Uber drivers, although ratings are very skewed, you know, between 4.4 and 5. There's not much variability. Second is, thirdly, the idea that at some point, maybe you won't even need to take out your phone to convey or send signals of your job potential or your talent profile or score to others. It might be embedded. The whole idea of singularity is that we've reached the pinnacle of our biological evolution, and now the only way we can evolve further is by merging or becoming just one with technology. I know it sounds very science fiction, but the fact that we feel so stupid now if we can't go online or take out our phone and go to Google, it gives you an indication that we're not that far off. But yeah, imagine a future where everybody has already been profiled. You carry your score, your talent or potential score with you in your wallet, in your phone, or inside you, and as you look for opportunities, you can choose to broadcast or send that signal to others, okay? Much like you do with Uber drivers. And this happens already in other areas, so in commerce and e-commerce. First of all, there has been we have bridged the gap between the physical and the digital world. Most of the physical world has been datified or digitalized already. So if I arrive to Tulsa for the first time and I don't know where to eat or where to sleep or whom to see, I can take out my phone and find out, and everything has been cataloged and rated. And the same will happen with people. Okay, so you might be walking on Fifth Avenue and taking out your phone or looking through your augmented reality device and see the information that people are sharing and maybe some profile information about themselves that might convey important or useful information about their potential or talent. It has already been happened in the world of dating. I mean, love as an industry is way more sophisticated and advanced than HR or the industry of and not necessarily more efficient. Online or mobile dating hasn't exponentially increased marital satisfaction or relationship success, mostly because the more choices you have, the more difficult it is to be satisfied with your choices. However, it's a good industry to mirror in the sense that it deals with consumers, it empowers consumers with information so that they can make more decisions. And in some cases, there's already augmented reality apps like this one, which enable you to go to a physical first date with somebody and access their past dating history and how they are rating and their information. Which if you apply it to the workplace, you can see how interviewing somebody while accessing their past employment history is not far off from what we have now, which involves recruiters secretly Googling them or going to LinkedIn or Facebook to find out if there's drunken pictures of them online or something, and they do it inaccurately.